So now we're going to talk about attitudes of corporate social responsibility from 1950s to the present. And around the 1950s, contemporary understandings of corporate social responsibility have evolved. You start seeing the social responsibilities of the businessman. And this is, of course, in contrast to those dissenters who thought that a business is most profitable when it is maximizing profit. What we are seeing over time is that more and more corporations are giving to social causes voluntarily and not necessarily in response to market constraints. Now, there's some general rules of corporate social responsibility that are important to note. First of all, corporations are economic institutions that first and foremost need to make some sort of a profit. If a corporation is not financially viable, then it obviously can't give to socially responsible causes. All firms, of course, have to follow multiple bodies of law, which can complicate what is responsible or irresponsible behavior. Managers, as trustees, have to behave in some sort of an ethical manner. Corporations, of course, have some sort of an obligation to correct any adverse social impacts they cause. So, for example, if a product is dangerous to society or detrimental to the environment, a corporation has a right to correct any damage that they have caused, and CSR is one way to do that. And understanding of social responsibility would vary between company and company. Furthermore, when it comes to social responsibility, managers need to meet the obligations of multiple stakeholders, and that can be difficult to resolve conflicts between those stakeholders. All corporate behavior, whether you're talking about CSR or otherwise, needs to comply with the social contract. And furthermore, corporations, especially when it comes to social responsibility, should be held transparent and accountable. And this is important because, generally speaking, most people believe that there is some sort of a positive correlation, not necessarily a relationship, but there is a positive correlation between socially responsible behavior and profits. So, corporate social responsibility has run into a major obstacle recently as corporations have expanded and gone international. What goes on domestically versus what goes on internationally can be problematic because a lot of corporations seem to be encouraged to take shortcuts when they are working abroad, and furthermore, international law doesn't necessarily adequately address the social impacts of businesses operating in foreign countries. So this makes social responsibility more important than ever. The corporation is serving as a check on its own behavior. Now, some problems that arise with corporate behavior overseas is first and foremost extraterritoriality. Boy, isn't that a tongue twister? So extraterritoriality means the application of one nation's laws within the borders of another organization. So for example, if an American company were to operate in a developing country, they would be applying American law to that foreign country, whether or not that foreign country has the same laws or standards as America. This is one of the problems with social responsibility. Just because it's socially responsible behavior in America doesn't necessarily mean it's responsible behavior in another country. Furthermore, extraterritoriality can be swapped. So American companies may not feel obligated to follow American laws when they are operating abroad because those foreign countries are not necessarily policing or enforcing American norms and standards on those multinational corporations. So this is one of the big problems of corporate social responsibility. Fortunately, non-governmental organizations have become advocates and checks on corporations that are behaving irresponsibly in their international operations. Now, there have also been certain kinds of values or norms that are arising. And so we have soft law and hard law. And soft law is usually something that's not necessarily tacit. It's usually a statement of philosophy or policy or principle. It kind of explains different kinds of norms and principles. And let me put those down as well. So a norm is a standard that arises over time and is generally enforced by some sort of a social sanction or a law. A principle, on the other hand, is a rule or a natural law or some sort of a truth that's used to guide conduct. So soft law incorporates norms and principle, but it's usually a little bit more tacit, and of course there's usually not any sort of mandatory enforcement mechanism that goes along with soft law. Hard law, on the other hand, is usually some sort of a legal code. If you do this, these are the punishments that you will face. That's the difference between the two. Now, some examples of norms being developed would be things like the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or the Tripartite Declaration of Principles Concerning Multinational Enterprises and Social Policy, or the norms on the responsibilities of transnational corporations. Those are all good examples. We also have codes of conduct. This pen's just not working with me today. So a code of conduct is a formal statement of aspirations, principles, guidelines, or rules for corporate behavior. And these are created by companies, trade associations, non-governmental organizations, governments, international organizations. And they typically are designed to target corporations. Now, of course, how effective they are depends on corporations carrying them out. How effective is a corporation in carrying these things out? Another kind of international corporate social responsibility phenomena is sustainability reporting. So you can see me. And sustainability reporting is the practice of a corporation of making public its information about its economic, social, and environmental performance. In other words, it's triple bottom line. Now the problem is with sustainability reporting that defining and measuring social performance is very, very difficult. Like I always say, how do you put a value on clean water? How do you put a value on giving a child a scholarship? How do you put values on those things? And unfortunately, this is an encouragement to be an entrepreneurship major. Creative entrepreneurs get rich, but creative accountants typically go to jail. So these accounting standards that come up within that are derived in one firm for explaining the economic value of protecting the environment are not comparable from one company to the next. So it's very, very difficult to know. Another kind of label that has come up is fair trade. And this is kind of one of these labeling schemes that's designed to indicate social responsibility. So these are what we call criteria labels. Fair trade is one that the idea is that consumers will pay some sort of a premium for commodities if the producers in developing nations either use sustainable methods or they are paid a just price for their labor. We'll talk about creating shared value and why Michael Porter thinks fair trade is a terrible idea in another video. There's also management standards. And management standards are kind of a way of modeling the methods of an organization to achieve certain goals. So you've got things like International Standards Organization, Eco Management and Audit Scheme, and it basically says this firm is adhering to these standards and that the whole international and corporate community can recognize this. Then there's some other ones like the Global Corporate social responsibility norms on social investment and lending. I'm thinking of the UN Principles for Responsible Investment, which requires signatories to consider a company's environmental, social, and governance performance when they invest in these firms. There's also a global index that sets a the FTSE 4 good, how about a tongue twister there? The FTSE 4 Good Global Index, which allows investors to invest in firms that seek companies that meet globally recognized standards for corporate social responsibility. There's also the International Finance Corporation, which promotes development and reduces poverty by funding projects for corporations. So again, there's a lot of these different kinds of standards, and the reason that any company would engage in any of these kind of labels would be basically to serve as some sort of a competitive advantage. So if a consumer wonders, should I buy the regular tea or the fair trade tea, maybe they would go and actually buy the fair trade tea because they support the responsibility behind it. That's why you would actually do these labels. Now, governments, of course, also are key drivers of corporate social responsibility, and they can make binding regulation through hard law, and they can actively also promote voluntary actions. And NGOs typically assist, quote unquote, governments to overwatch multinational corporations, and they can make it public knowledge when corporations depart from internationally established norms. Now, there's really no way for any company to avoid the global CSR system. And those that do, again, will run into trouble with governments and NGOs. The important issue is whether or not the emerging system is the most appropriate way to manage these large corporations. And that's kind of a debate. One final note that I want you to take away with you. When you look at norms, principles, and codes of conduct, the norm is usually the most general, the principle is a little more specific, and the codes of conduct are ever more directive. So norms don't exactly tell you what you should do, principles are a little bit more clear about what you should do, and codes of conduct tell you exactly what you should do. So there's kind of a lot going on here in terms of theory behind corporate social responsibility, but the main driver that I want you to take away from this lesson is that it's almost impossible to avoid the obligations to the international community of behaving in some sort of a socially responsible manner. The best thing you can do is try to create shared value, which will be the subject of another video. But corporate social responsibility is unavoidable, and it seems that companies that have a reputation for social responsible behavior may be more profitable in the long run. So in our next video, we will talk about ways to implement a corporate social responsibility program. Looking forward to seeing you then.